The impact of allowing cable to compete, was there any pushback from the broadcast networks of
Pass, pass, pass.
of course there was. I mean, but talk about how that impacted you and the awards team. I mean, what were the sort of things you had to deal with? Were there decisions that had to be made? Were there?
Well, it was more a decision that was made at the very highest level of the Academy, and that was at the Board of Governors. And the feeling was that, I'll give you a specific example. John Moffat was a major big deal network director of variety programming. So John all of a sudden starts getting work with HBO because the HBO was doing stand-ups and comedy specials and Broadway, Jackie Mason on Broadway or whatever it might be. And so John came to the awards committee and he said, I'm kind of doing the same thing over here that I was doing for ABC and the other networks. And not only am I doing pretty much the same thing, it's really, really high-class stuff that the production levels, this is Emmy-level stuff. I'm an Emmy-level director. I've been nominated. And now all of a sudden, I'm cut out. I don't have an opportunity to get the kind of Emmy recognition that I think that I should. Mm. And the Board of Governors, the awards committee, basically said, we get it, but here's the problem. We define national broadcasting, again, this would be ABC, NBC, CBS. We define national broadcasting as having a presence in the homes of over 50% of the country. And so we would divide up the country into the Nielsen demos, and we would say New York has 7.75% of the whole country. Los Angeles has 5.75%, whatever the demos might be. And then we would say, okay, ABC, we see that you're in New York, so you're going to get that 7.5. We see that you're over here, you're going to get that 5%, and count, and now 50%. And so you're now in national programming. The problem with cable, especially in the early days of cable, is that it was kind of an entrepreneurial situation with different pods within different Nielsen demos. And there was absolutely no way that you would be able to argue that, let's say, HBO in 1988 had the same kind of home penetration that you had with a conventional network. So how, John, are we going to be able to bring you into our competition if, in effect, in Los Angeles, you've got all of these people and you've got a very limited footprint of subscribers for HBO. So the question came to the board and it was ultimately resolved in a kind of Occam's razor way. And the Occam's razor way was we are going to count homes passed as opposed to with broadcast homes entered. So if you're in a demo and you're available in the demo, you get the whole demo. So I might be HBO and, in a city of 10 million, I've got 750,000 subscribers. That's okay. You're getting the entire 7.5% or whatever it might be that Nielsen has designated as this percentage of the country. Now start adding yours up, and even though you might have a fraction of the home penetration that a network has, you're in the demo. Mm. And once you're in the demo with homes passed, that means that you're going to be able to qualify in the same way as syndication or the networks or soft feeds from PBS would qualify, and so you're in. That was the solution to the problem.
Was that the same justification used for online and web-based programming?
Online and web-based was more like regular network programming, because if you turned on your computer, there it was. So we considered that to be penetrating in a way that was more than homes passing. But the general principle remained the same, that be a broadcast or be a cable with subscribers or being a stream, which would come with your package on your internet, that you were sufficiently represented and sufficiently engaged in that particular demo that you were going to get it as a contributor to your 50% mark.
Was there a discussion over the years with the board of defining television? Was it just that? Was it just access to who could absorb it? Or
Yes,
what
it was. Well,
how has that evolved?
It was kind of like Sir Thomas or St. Thomas Aquinas trying to figure out how many angels could dance on the head of a pin. I mean, these discussions that we would have, telecommunications, should we be the Television Academy or should we be the Telecommunications Academy? Because we need to have a big enough tent in order to bring everything in. And these discussions would go on and on into the night at board meetings and subcommittees. And ultimately, it was sort of like, oh hell, it's a big tent, everybody's in. Come on, let's not, get too picky about just exactly what we're calling ourselves. Everybody knows what we are. We're the Television Academy, and everybody knows. It's kind of like pornography. You know it when you see it. It's kind of like television. You know it when you see it. So don't bother defining it.
And in a way, it's it's such a bigger tent than the Motion Picture Academy has defined what is a theatrical release. So there's so much more. It's any content, basically, right? I mean, anything
on the recognized platforms that come in as and the array of categorization is such that you can generally find. You're probably not going to make a program which is outside of the cluster of genres that make up traditional and modern television. So, the Motion Picture Academy and the Television Academy, in their awards situations, share a mutual problem, and the mutual problem has to do with television ratings for programming that is not mass market programming, not mass market films, features, or things on TV. If you have a year at the Motion Picture Academy with the Academy Awards in which you've got Titanic, the ratings are like this because Titanic is a mass market element to the show, and that people want to see how's my favorite movie going to do this year. Whereas if you have a string of small boutique films that have a limited release, and do not have, in the flyover much of an audience, you're not going to have people tuning in because, part of the fun of watching an award show is rooting for your favorite. I hope, Bob wins. The Television Academy is in the same situation. You look at the mass market programming, NCIS, or a lot of the programming that really gets network programming mainly that gets big old-fashioned audiences, as opposed to the niche programming, a Handmaid's Tale or a Fleabag or a Russian Doll or whatever. These are very high in quality per the perspective of the Television Academy, but low in terms of resonance with the general public. And so you have, an extraordinary lineup of nominees and winners in the 2019 Emmy Awards, but you have a 30% drop in the tune-in. Sunday Night Football pretty much kills the ratings for the Emmy Awards. But, it's just sort of like, don't you want to see if, Phoebe Waller-Bridge wins for... Who the hell's that? I don't know who that is. And so it's a situation in which you have a diminished audience because you have a diminished distribution of the product that you are recognizing as it goes out to that audience. I remember the first year that I was at the Academy, I think that we had 47 or 48 million viewers for the telecast. And but back in those days, there was a, quote, gentleman's agreement among the networks that on Emmy night, because it was on a wheel, that there was not going to be highly competitive programming. That you would not, once you got Sunday Night Football, that was the death knell of the TV Academy Emmy ratings.
Why
Just
didn't they
kiss it goodbye?
But I know so when it's on Fox. It's on. Is it Fox on Monday Night Football?
Yeah, I mean,
But
how many times a week is football on? So it's hard to find a slot someplace. What, Tuesday afternoon?
well, has there ever been talk of moving the Emmys to Saturday or Friday?
There has been, but then you get into, it's historically the lowest ratings of the week are on Saturday. That's just an absolute dead zone in there. And,
Or what about time of year? Why is it in September and not when the other award shows are?
because it used to be when all of this was set up in the Stone Age, you would have the broadcast networks concluding their big run at the end of May sweeps. So May 31st was the end of it. Then you would have summer reruns, June and July. Remember summer reruns? And, I didn't see this show. Well, you can watch it this summer. It's going to be on again. Then when cable came in, cable said, we see a hole in the line here, that the broadcast networks are running from the middle of September into the November sweeps and then the February sweeps and then the May sweeps, and they just got this. But they effectively go to the beach during the summer. That's where we're going to punch in. And so that's where the cable network came in with a lot of their programming. And then all of a sudden we were programming hot and heavy 12 months out of the year. The original this Academy's date for the awards was in September because it was on the Sunday night before the beginning of the fall season. And so if you had the show that night, your NBC, instead of selling your commercial time, you would keep it for yourself to promote your shows. And so it was kind of the opportunity to look back on the prior year, recognize the programming, but then to really set up and to promote what was coming for the fall.
Do you think it still works, or do you think that should change?
I think that it's irrelevant now. I know that if you watch the show that we just had, you saw a lot of promotions for programming coming up. But you could have the show in March, and there would be a lot of promotions for shows coming up, because there's a constant refreshing of the original programming landscape. And it's no longer a situation in which things shut down network-wise for the summer months and then pick up again in September.
And then there's also the hanging show problems where you have a cutoff, right, in the rules of when a show has to end to qualify. And I think, was it The Sopranos or Mad Men or some huge show was just after?
It was the final season of The Sopranos. And for one reason or another, HBO decided to program the final 2 episodes after the May 31st cutoff. Awards year runs from June 1st to May 31st. So all of a sudden, the Sunday night after May 31st, and then the one after that, which was the end of the entire show, the entire series, was going to air. And per our rules, those 2 shows, which probably at least had the promise of being 2 of the most important shows in one of the most, if not the most important series ever on television, they're gone. And they weren't going to be included in the prior year. And because they were orphaned out there, they weren't going to be included in the following year. So Chris Albrecht, who was running HBO at that time, called me up and he said, look, we've made a really serious error. That we have dumped these 2 shows over, and I wish that we hadn't, but we did, and are we going to now lose these? Can you do anything about it? Can you give us any kind of a special dispensation to reach over the demarcation line from one year to another and pull those in? That was the beginning of the hanging episodes, which have been a major headache for the Academy and definitely the awards department ever since. But at the same time, you have a production and a release schedule which no longer fits the old paradigm of we ended on May 31st and we started up again in the middle of September. When you go all the way around the year and then you have a cutoff internal to that, then it gets messy. And we've done the best that we can to clean that up. But no matter where you would put your awards year, beginning and end, you're going to get it.
Yeah, and that your HBO was accommodated. They were able to include that
We
in
did.
the FYCs.
Yep, it came in.
Yeah.
Although I don't think a lot of the American public felt that the last episode of The Sopranos was the last 10 seconds of the last episode of The Sopranos was worth all that much.
Did you like it?
Yeah, I thought it was fine. It made total sense to me.
I thought it was brilliant. Let's talk about category classifications, because that's another area where you have a show like, well, the one you've talked about before is Shameless, where is it a comedy, is it a drama, and can it switch midway if it becomes more of one or the other? How do you deal with that?
Well, we'll take the case of Shameless. It was a situation in which there was a dramedy situation going on where you had serious elements, these people who were so addled by drugs and the terrible decisions they were making, but then you would have the comedic elements that you would have in. So it was a situation in which we recognized that this is a new kind of programming. It's not sitcoms, I Love Lucy down at this end, and it's not heavy duty Hill Street Blues or whatever it is down at this end. But there's stuff that goes back and forth, and you would call it a dramedy. And where are you going to put it? And so the producers of the show came to us and said, we always considered this to be more comedic than dramatic, and we can testify to that by telling you what kind of a writer's room we have. We do not have a drama series writing room. Drama series writing room, like in the old Bochco days, is basically a writer's room, but one or two people would get credit for the story and for the teleplay. That it was a kind of a smaller boutique style of writing, as opposed to the kind of Wild West situation that you had in comedy writing rooms. That was shown to us as being more of a comedy series writing room. And at that stage of the game, the board said, okay, we will go ahead and give that a dispensation to go to comedy series, but it can't jump around now. If it goes over there, you have to stay over there. And that's the general rule, that if you come in, the Lemony Snicket series, about a series of unfortunate events, came in under one category, and then they said, we really think that we got a children's show here because it's about a family of children and all of the horrible things that happened to them. And so we said, you can move it, but you can't get out of there. That's your identity now. So we do make these accommodations from time to time. They're the exceptions that prove the rule. We also have another situation in terms of time. If you're 30, then you're a comedy. If you're 60, then you're a drama. And if you want to get out of the category, then you have to submit a number of episodes, your choice, to what we refer to as the industry panel, which is a group of high-level industry executives working in programming who would then I'm the only person who knows who they are, and they're appointed internally, and they're appointed or volunteer internally, and are appointed externally from the industry. And then we would take those 12, 15 or whatever people who would be serving on any one and say, we want you to look at this episode, and you can look at the other ones, and then you tell us. And so we've had some switches that go from one to the other, and some that don't go from one to the other.
And in that case, it's anonymous because of undue influence?
Yeah. Nobody wants to be associated with a decision that doesn't go their way.
I mean, yeah, and what about the membership nominating these shows? Is there ever pushback on why is this in this category with my show?
Yes.
So,
because there's a certain amount of ambiguity about what should go in what category. Shameless, was a very good example of that. We had a situation this year, Surviving R. Kelly, which went into informational. And the question was, shouldn't that be just in straight doc? And I think that there was a very good argument for being in straight doc. And so the appropriate peer group is going back and reviewing and bolstering the eligibility guidelines for what is informational for next year's competition, and it'll be clearer so that we won't get into. But you definitely have some ambiguity in terms of the placement of these shows.
So it's not totally up to the person nominating their show. It's they have to basically adhere to what the guidelines are, though they might not
Yeah.
be eligible.
Yeah.
So talk about the situation with guest actors versus regular performers. What kind of issues have come up with that category?
Guest actors have banged around for ever since they came in, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago. We first had a situation in which a guest actor would have only one appearance. Okay, you're a guest actor and then you're gone. So it would be a situation like, for example, on Law and Order, where you would have a particular crime this week and you would have the perpetrator of the crime who would be a guest actor who would come in. That's basically what it was set up to accommodate, because we did not want to have these celebrity guest actors come in. I remember one Law and Order where Carol Burnett came in, played totally against character. She was some sort of pathological homicidal maniac, and it was kind of like a situation in which she's going to be sucking the air out of the supporting actor category. And what we need to do is to protect the supporting actor category by moving the people who come in, these high-profile, they weren't cameos, but they were high-profile people who would come in on a one-off, from effectively raking in, because we had seen that out of the, back then when we had 5 nominations in a category, maybe 3 of them would be one only guests coming in, and they would be supports, and they would be just absolutely, taking over in these categories. So the idea was, let's move them out into their own category, which would be appropriate because they shouldn't be competing with supports, and have them as just this one-off. Well, then it was, maybe 3. Maybe they were in a storyline in which they came back 2 or 3 weeks in a row, or maybe 2 weeks in a row. So maybe we would move it to 2 to accommodate that. And then the latest iteration of it is that you could not be in 50% of the episodes that were eligible in this particular year. We had that horrible situation a couple of years ago with Peter McNichol on Veep. He came in as a guest actor, and let's say there were 10 shows, and he said, I was in 4. And so we said, okay, that's less than 50%. Let's go ahead and get you in to guest actor. So we get him into guest actor. He gets a nomination. And then, as is often the case, one of our friends from the press said, well, wait a minute, he was in a 5th episode. We said, was he? And they said, yes, he was. Well, give us the episode, we'll take a look at it. Okay, it's this episode X. So we take a look at episode X. So here we are having this scene we're discussing, and there's a TV monitor over my shoulder, and Peter Nichols is giving an interview or whatever he was doing it. That's an appearance in that particular show. And so Peter McNichol lost his nomination because it was a technical violation. Whether or not that was the right thing to do or not, I'll leave for smarter people. But in terms of a rigorous and unflinching reading of the rule, there we have it. So now flash forward to 2019 in this ever problematic situation of a guest to a variation on it, and that is the supporting player in long form. The supporting player, this is so-called Ellen Barkin rule, where she was a supporting player in a movie of the week or a miniseries or whatever it was, and it was a less than 5% of the total running time appearance. And there was complaint. It was a cameo. Well, it was more than a cameo, yeah, but it really wasn't, And so that went back and forth, and then we said, okay, we need to see at least 5% of screen time in order to qualify for that particular support role. So we go through and we look at everything, and we think that we're okay. We release our nominations. And then someone comes forward and says, I actually timed these things in an editorial bay, and I found that 2 of your people who were nominees did not hit your 5% rule. So we went back and we looked at it, and what we found was a misreading of what we considered to be an on-screen performance. So if I'm having a conversation with you, and it's a cinematography style shoot, so the camera's over my shoulder, and you say something to me, and then the camera's over your shoulder, and I say something to you. Well, the time that you're saying something to me, we would count as part of the contextual on-screen appearance, because acting is playing off one another. Unless you're in a Samuel Beckett monologue, it's a situation in which you are there, because what you say to me is dependent upon how I react to you. So if you start in saying something to me and I say, oh, something like that, then you're going to react to it, and I'm going to be part of your scene. So we had to clarify that, even though there might be a cutaway, there was some, this was in the Central Park 5 show, that you would have me and I'm sitting in the jury room and, oh my goodness, did he really say that? Okay, that was a 3-second shot. That would count. But then when I'm in a room with a meeting of the lawyers and we're talking about things, and I might not be on all the time, but people are reacting to what I'm saying, and then it comes back, and then I'm reacting to what they're saying, that we would count that in. So it was an ambiguity about contextual on screen, and I think that we will be more specific to lay that out. We thought that was kind of acting 101, and everybody understood that, but.
Have the rules being public and transparent ever come back to bite you in the behind?
No,
because of that?
it's always a good idea.
Yeah.
It really is.
And then it leads to clarification, I guess, when these things come up.
Yeah. Every year there is either an opportunity that we see or kind of something that's told to us that we need to do a little bit better in terms of identifying a particular element of the competition. And I don't think a year goes by that we don't go back in and say, oh, this language is a little bit ambiguous, maybe we should change this, and we do.
Are there any other sort of, in your view, regrettable eliminations of nominees because someone from the press or someone from another show came up and said they really don't qualify?
Yeah, I mean, we have had situations in which, I remember one time, it was back in the hotel days of the Blue Ribbon panels, and we were doing the judging, and this was a variety performer, and I got a call from the room and where they were doing the judging. He said, we've been looking at this tape, and that performer is not in that tape. And so I said, send it up, we'll take a look at it. No appearance whatsoever. So I had the entry form, and I called the person's manager up and said, you sent us the wrong tape. This person is not represented, and this is a dead nomination. This is not, I just want you to know, this isn't going anyplace. You basically shot yourself in the foot by sending us the wrong tape. Well, of course, why didn't you take a look at the tape and be assured that everything was fine? Of course, the blame always shifts over, and I accept that. I think that that's true. We didn't have the bandwidth to look at everything, but that was a difficult, embarrassing, unhappy situation where we had an elimination simply because we were not sufficiently rigorous in our preparation for the Blue Ribbon panel.
Is that your responsibility, is to check all the submissions that they meet the qualifications?
Well, it's easier now. Yes, of course. I would say that probably 75% of what the awards staff does in preparation of the ballots is to check on eligibility. You have people who may not be in the on-screen credits simply because the network has decided to only have certain categories of credits on. For example, you have sound mixers and sound editors. You might have the supervisor, but you won't have the whole team, and there might be a team of 4 other people who are on there. And so you look to eligibility outside of what you conventionally would look at. You have people who come in with credits which are not in the book as being a proper credit. For example, in drama and comedy series, we do not accept consulting producer as a legitimate credit. Executive producer, producer, co-producer, etc. No consulting producer. Well, we had a situation a couple of years ago in which it was brought to our attention that, I'm speaking now as the consulting producer, I, working with my agent and manager, negotiated this particular credit because it was advantageous in certain ways that I'm not going to try and explain to you, but for legal and financial reasons, this is the reason I took it. However, having said that, I can tell you that I functioned as a high-level producer on this show. So in that situation, we kind of punted and went over to the PGA, which was also doing vetting, and we said, here's a consulting producer. How did you vet this consulting producer? Because that would be an okay credit for them. Oh, he's in. He's fine. And so we took them in. But I would say that in any given year, there are probably 4 or 5 consulting producers who might say, can I come in? And we'll say no, because you didn't get the imprimatur of the PGA over here in consulting. And, maybe 2 or 3 that will be able to come in. But the question of eligibility is always a major, major concern in the preparation of the nomination ballots.
And then who is allowed to appeal or to make a plea that you reconsider? I know there was an interview you gave where credited by the WGA, if they credit someone as credited by, then that person is able to say, I want this show submitted as this instead of this?
Yeah, anybody can appeal.
Mm-hmm.
If you were what we have in a number of categories, say specifically in documentary categories, nonfiction, special, you would have a hard cap of X number of producers that can come in. So it would be, let's say that the hard cap is at 7. And we very well might have a number of producers with eligible titles who would be otherwise eligible, but the entry comes in, it goes up to 7, and you might have a producer credit, but you're not part of the 7 that gets submitted. Then they'll come back to us and say, I really think that I did more than Bob, who was the same title and got in, and that's a situation in which they can then appeal, and then we'll say, well, what specifically did you do? And then it goes to the appeal, and we have a certain wiggle room that we would be able to accommodate. There was just a recent situation this year, which was, I think, very impactful in terms of, the whole business of the foundation, in which we had a show in which this group that appeared every year, they were kind of like judges, and they were considered to be talent, even though they had executive producer status. And so they said, we want to come into eligibility. And we said, no, because even though the show might have given you that vanity credit, we don't recognize talent as being, like a shark in Shark Tank, or a judge on The Voice or another singing competition, whatever. Your talent, you're not part of the producing, and we want the producers to come in. And effectively, since you are a high-profile talent, we don't like the fact that you're trying to muscle out these hardworking, lower-level, not quite as cloudy, legitimate producers.
And you can't be nominated for the same Emmy for the same role on a show in 2 categories, correct? How does that work?
There's a basic principle of the competition that you can only win 1 Emmy for doing 1 thing. And so, let's say, for example, in makeup and hair, we have a situation, this is very much a union-driven kind of situation, where on a union show, you cannot have the same person be the makeup person and the hairstylist. A non-union show, you very well might have a stylist taking care of hair and makeup, but on a union show that you wouldn't be able to do that. And so we just said, you can do one or you can do the other. We have situations in which, because of certain editing machinery that's around, you can be a sound editor, but you can also be a sound mixer. And because you're working on an Avid machine specifically, those two separate things tend to blend together on certain programs, especially on nonfiction reality programming. And so there is a general rule that sometimes gets into specific ambiguities.
Mm. Is there anything you've personally pushed to change in the rules after administering it for this many years?
I have. One of the things that I was very keen to see happen was to move the entire engineering awards out of creative arts and into their own standalone. When you go to a creative arts show, there are all kinds of things that you get. There are, the editors, cinematographers. Okay, I understand that. But, the crew that's putting together software for rotoscoping, who are these guys? And so it didn't ever make sense in the creative arts shows to include the engineers, and I lobbied very hard to get them their own standalone, which they have had for many years now. We're going to be doing it on October 23rd, and it's the fifth and final award show that we have in the course of the year. It's my favorite of all of them because I really like the engineers and I like the stuff that they're doing in terms of cutting-edge technology. There was at one time no award for casting. Mm-hmm. And I helped draft the argument that there are awards that are given for things that don't necessarily show up on screen in a direct way. The casting executive is going to make a difference in terms of who's on screen, and that's a performer award, but you don't go back into the casting room and give that individual credit for doing that. The Motion Picture Academy still doesn't have casting. And I argued that I thought that it was a completely legitimate, although it was behind the scenes. It's not just front of the camera or behind the camera. It's way behind the camera over here in the casting room. That was something that I was able to help the casting. There was a casting peer group, but they didn't have their own award. And so they got in. Stunts was another one. It turned on, we don't consider the stunt eligibility to be tied to how well you can throw yourself off a bridge, but we consider it to be how well you choreographed it. Right. And so it's not stunt, but it's stunt coordination, which is a subgroup of choreography. And so once we established that there was a paradigm in choreography for Emmy eligibility, we could establish that there was a paradigm for stunt coordination, and that came in that way.
And you talked about with every time that you expand the categories, it might diminish some of the others. I mean, as much as you need to expand with the growth of the industry, have you had to cut down and combine?
We have something called the Rule of 14, and the Rule of 14 is kind of the lungs of the competition. Breathe in, breathe out. If you have a situation in which 2 years in a row there are less than 14 entries in a category, then it goes before the board, and the board says, well, we're going to discontinue the category, or more likely, we are going to merge it with another category. This happened several years ago in which there was a dearth of miniseries, limited series, and we had basically a commingling for a period of a year of miniseries and movies, and that was a program category. We had always had performer in a limited series or a special, performer or director, whatever it might be, but we hadn't blended the programs. So the Rule of 14 said you cannot continue on for a third year with less than 14, and if you don't get 14, you're going to go over to a blend, which we did. And then all of a sudden, limited series kind of blew up, and now it's kind of movies that are a little bit diminished. But a lot of that is simply because certain streaming services that have a lot of movies tend to pick the movie that they think is their strongest contender, and they put that one in and they don't enter some of the other ones that would be eligible.
What about the decision, I think it was 2009, to expand the main categories beyond 5 nominees? What was the reaction to that?
I think that it's generally been positive. I think that most of the negatives in that is, why don't you do a little bit more? We sort of think that there's an opportunity not to have 7 or 8, or maybe you can bump it up to 9 or 10. And the awards committee and the board has made its move, and whether or not it will further expand, it's up to them. Another thing that you get pressure on is, okay, you've got comedy series, and you got well over 100 comedy series that are entering in your competition, and you just have a limited number. Why don't you do this? Why don't you do comedy series multicam and comedy series single cam? Then you can have 10 comedy series. Even if you do 5, do 6, you'll have 12. That way, you're not in a situation in which you are taking comedy series and expanding it out to 10 or 12. You can simply have 2. So then the counter argument against that is, well, when I go to the party afterwards and I show somebody my Emmy, I won for comedy series, they said, no, I won for comedy series. What comedy series did you win? Multicam. Well, I won for single cam, which is better. And then all of a sudden you're in a situation in which you're tiering awards. We got into that for like 1 year back in the administration of Rod Serling. And there was a tiering, and what you had was lead actor in a drama series, lead actress in a drama series. And then you would have overall best actor in a drama series. And so you would have a situation in which, I might win the performance category for drama series, but then somebody else says, yeah, but I won the overall acting in a drama series. And so it's sort of a situation where you can have these knockdown dragouts at the governor's ball where people are claiming to be the king of the hill or the queen of the roost, and it just doesn't. It only lasted for a year because the idea of tiering, tiering, the Emmys that way is a big mistake. Don't do it.
And as you said, it'll diminish
Yeah.
the value.
Yeah, and I think that the argument to expand comedy series, just for an example, is something that the board can legitimately consider. But on the other hand, if they do go into a multicam or a single cam split, then all of a sudden do you have a tiering? Well, I imagine that you could argue that, well, multicam and single cam comedy series are very different animals. Barry is a single cam comedy and Big Bang is a multicam. Those are very different shows.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's sort of like joke, laugh, joke, laugh, joke, laugh. And that's kind of what we're doing here. And that's sort of the nature of the legacy of the genre of comedy series.
Right. What about the situation where you have the same person winning year after year after year, or the same show? Has there been discussion about limiting how many wins one individual
Yes.
or one show?
One of the first things that I got into at the Academy was the Gene Stapleton request to stop having Edith Bunker win the Emmy Award year after year for All in the Family. And it was Murphy Brown was another situation, one after another, until finally Candace Bergen said, that's enough. I'm not going to enter. I think that I've done what I need to do with this. The question still remains, do we have a unique situation every time an actor goes out? I know that it's the same role, but it's a different situation. It's a different way to play it. And so we should respect the individuality and the uniqueness of that performance. No, the other argument says, this is a role, they're doing the same thing over and over again. Julia Louis-Dreyfus is basically playing the Veep for the same kinds of, that's her character. She's the Veep. And part of her character is that she is a very narrow, self-serving, narcissistic character. And once you got a box like that, it's really kind of difficult for a performer, even if they were, up to it or interested in doing it, to get out, because that jumps the curb on the confines of the character. So it's an ongoing discussion.
Mm. How are the honorary awards recipients determined?
In terms of the governor's award, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and why wasn't there one this year?
The governor's award is another one of these juried awards, in which you have a committee or a jury that's assigned by the chair, and the jury comes together and they review not only things that have come in over the transom, but also things that come from the table. We had the Star Trek franchise a couple of years ago. That came from a committee member who showed up at the committee wearing Spock ears and This year, it was a situation in which there were, wonderful candidates as always, but the feeling was that from time to time, if you don't have unanimity on the panel to do an award, that it's okay. In fact, it's really good for the award to leave it fallow for a year. So there was no criticism meant that we didn't give an award. It was just a statement that this is the nature of how these jury awards go. There's a possibility of one or none. So
let's talk about the Primetime Emmy ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
You served as executive producer
on the creative arts.
On the creative arts. So talk about what your role was with those shows.
Well, you have to go back in time to the way the creative arts were dealt with and thought of, and the culture of the creative arts within the Academy at that particular time. The creative arts were a low-budget, kind of afterthought sort of situation. What we did was we did 2 nights. It was a weekend. You did the creative arts on Saturday, and then you did the telecast on Sunday. And when I came, we were at the Pasadena Civic Auditorium. So the Pasadena Civic Auditorium was in 2 parts. There was the theater, which we used on Sunday, and then there was the X Hall, the exhibition hall, which was adjacent to that. What we would do is we would set up tables for all of the attendees. We would have dinner, and then we would have the awards. Or we would have the awards, and then we would have dinner, whatever it might have been in any given year. As the producer of that show, my basic job was to, write a script, which was essentially a kind of roadmap of, here we're going to give this award, and then the next award's going to be this one, and then this one, and then to find and to engage and write for the presenters. The presenters were typically performers whose awards were being given in that particular evening. And my crew was up in another room when we were doing seating and whatever, and if the show was going to start at 7, we'd put up, lock it up, and then we'd go down and we'd do the show. And hi, nice to see you. Thank you for coming. Here's your presentation. Here's your cards. Here's your script. No teleprompter. I'm sorry, we don't have a teleprompter. And it would go one after the other, and the awards would be given out in a very perfunctory way. Here's your salad. Here's your Emmys, as Spike Jones Jr. used to describe it. At a particular point, there was an election. And Merle Marshall was a candidate. She had been a longtime member of the board and a principal within the political arena of the Academy. And she put together a platform which included an equal treatment financially, in terms of respect, in terms of personnel, in terms of hiring a professional producer to come in with a crew, with a professional script writer, with going out through our talent people and getting people who weren't just there anyway that night. And so Merle said, if you elect me the chair, then I will definitely creative arts people, below the line people who make up most of the governors in this room, that I'm going to take care of you. And I think very appropriately, because I think that the way that it had been done with me, who really wasn't that kind of level of producer. I mean, I could stage manage and I could get people on and off the stage in a fairly efficient manner, but it wasn't a show. It wasn't appropriate to the dignity and respect that should have been given to the creative arts. So that was the big change when we made that. Then all of a sudden the money went up, and it was a completely different situation. Spike Jones Jr. was brought in. He produced the creative arts under horrible duress with that long show for 20 years. And now Bob Bain has been brought in, and I think does an absolute wonderful job. But if you were to go back, and we didn't tape the old creative arts shows because we weren't going to afford that. And if you were to go back and you were to look at that presentation as opposed to what we saw from the stage of the Microsoft Theater in September, so they're like, what do these two things have to do with one another?
How was the decision made to separate it out, and who decided which categories would be awarded at creatives versus primetime?
It was a situation in which we were looking for the most popular categories to go on the telecast, because our bread and butter financially was the licensing fee, and the licensing fee was tied to the ratings. And so we wanted to have mass market, mass media kinds of categories. Now, we only were able and still are only able to go that far. We've got programs and we've got the performers. Those are your big ticket items. But then you additionally have other categories, namely writing and directing, which are on the telecast. And the guilds, the unions, the agreements are such that the writers and directors are going to be getting their Emmys on the telecast. And so that was a sidebar that went in with that situation. And then everybody else was basically out. For some years, we would have two creative arts that would appear over on the telecast, but then those went away, and you have basically what you got 27 categories this year, and those were the categories. I mean, you're not going to have sound mixing for a drama series on the telecast because your audience that's watching is not going to be really relating to that, and is not going to be sure and watch the Emmys this Sunday night. We're going to have sound mixing for a drama series. Okay, great.
Talk about, for those who, in 5-10 years from now, maybe the wheel won't exist. So explain what the wheel is, how it came into place, and what the importance is of ratings to the Academy and why.
Well, the wheel was basically the establishment of the awards as a pan-industry event. And I've talked a little bit about the situation that Rich got into with trying to, go solo with ABC, which Don Ohlmeyer felt was a betrayal of the pan-industry event, which was the Emmy Awards. All of which made much more sense before Sunday Night Football. Because once Sunday Night Football came in, the whole idea of, okay, we're going to back off, we're going to respect the Emmy Awards this one Sunday night, we're not going to program again, that left. Once Sunday Night Football came in, and we were devastated by the football ratings. I mean, what was it, Rams versus somebody that just totally dominated Sunday Night Football.
Right.
It was just a situation in which you have you're structured for failure in terms of ratings when you're on a night, when you're in a situation in which you have a mega mass market kind of program that is going to go up against your program. And on top of that, as I mentioned earlier, you have a certain a certain degree of turning away from mass market programming for your nominations to more boutique programming. Not, NCIS, which is a very, very highly rated program, as opposed to Fleabag, which is not a highly rated program and which is on a service which is not universally, just turn on your TV and all of a sudden there's HBO or Hulu or whatever it might be.
So how are the networks selected through the wheel process every year? What network is the Emmys on?
It's just a situation in which they rotate. It's a two double-decker bus here. You've got 4 players, ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox. And when we do a wheel agreement, we do it for 2 times around. So any wheel agreement is going to be a total of 8 years. And whatever the traditional sequence is, we stick with the sequence. So if you do bang, 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 bang in the first one, you're going to do the same bang, 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 bang in the second one. And then you negotiate a new wheel.
And what do you think about, HBO pitched at one point to be
Yes.
the exclusive carrier. What about including other platforms or networks into the wheel?
I think that that's a matter of discussion. I think that that's something that the board definitely is going to be engaged in as time goes by. But I think that, we had 2 ultimatums that were issued to us with regards to busting up the wheel. The first one came from Don Olmeyer, which I have described. The second one came from Leslie Moonves. And that was the one that you just were referencing, was the HBO, that HBO came in and said, here's a whole bunch of money. Why don't you come over and you'll be on HBO, okay? And, Leslie Moonves said that would be a big mistake because you would be obviating the tradition of the pan-network agreement. And it's a different culture that you're getting into, and it's not an industry event when you don't have industry players at the network level involved in it. And so the board said, okay.
And then in your view, what's the last few years, there's been fewer and fewer broadcast network shows nominated. So why do they still want it?
Well, mostly the crew that works on the Emmy Awards that Sunday is in a trailer where you have a monitor that gets the feed from the stage, and so you don't get the commercials. This year, for the first time, we were in a hotel room at the Marriott. We didn't have a monitor feed from the stage, but we got the whole show and we got all of the commercials. I was shocked by how few commercials Fox was selling and how many commercial slots they were keeping for themselves. It was just, if I saw one Masked Singer commercial, I saw 10 Masked Singer commercials or references to it. And I think that this is like the last opportunity in American broadcasting where you can have, theoretically, you can have a great big audience, such as the Rams game had a great big audience. They're out there. You have access to them. And it's a situation in which you are not constricted by the limitations of subscription services or streaming services or whatever it might be. You're out there. As we were talking about earlier, the difference between homes passed and homes penetrated. Well, all the penetration is going to be in the broadcast. And it was just one after another after another. And I said to somebody, I said, clearly the amount of cash that they are deferring seems to them to be less in terms of overall value than the amount of coming attractions is really the way I would describe it. It's like at a movie theater. It's a coming attractions kind of situation, and they wanted to have that time. They wanted to have that great outreach. And, Leslie Moonves was always referencing the fact that the last big deal, all-American opportunity to watch TV was in broadcast. And I think that his strategy, which was a very winning and very correct strategy, was to put on programming that would get the mass audience. And he was extremely good at that. And that's the reason CBS is typically the #1 rated network, because of those big shows that they put on for the mass audience. Those big shows that are put on for the mass audience are not necessarily the ones that the Television Academy voters tend to be drawn to. You don't see NCIS. I keep picking on them, but I know that that's a major big show. But you don't see NCIS. You see The Handmaid's Tale. You don't see NCIS. You see Fleabag, or you see,
Russian Doll.
Russian Doll.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different culture between those two areas, and the area that the broadcast networks like to be in is that Sunday night, when they can go all out to, they wish they would have gone out a little bit further. Maybe next year, instead of advertising on the Emmys, they'll advertise on Sunday Night Football, which I'm sure a lot of advertisers already have done, because there's something to be said about the eyeballs approach to programming. I think that we neglect to understand the deep structure of television when we don't understand that television was a medium that emerged out of radio, and radio was a medium that was dominated by ad agencies. And in the early days of television, I can remember there was a Jack Benny show, and he does a few jokes and he does a few skits, and he's standing there on stage, and he says, it'd be really nice to have a smoke right now. He said, I kind of like to have a smoke with a friend of mine. Marilyn, can you come out? So here comes Marilyn Monroe out from promoting, who knows what. And he says, well, let's spark up a couple of Luckies here. So they're blowing smoke on, and they're talking and whatever about whatever she's doing. And then, he says, well, thanks a lot. It's nice seeing you. And so she goes off, and then they resume the show. Here you had not a stop in the action of the show, and we'll be back in a minute. We're going to the commercials. Those commercials were in early television right in the middle of the shows. And, you have a return to that with product placement. I can remember it was a show in which these two characters were having a discussion, and they were in a kitchen. And the one character says, I sure would like to have a Milky Way right now. Do you have one? I got one right here. Opens the door, pulls out a Milky Way, hands it to him. Man, that's good. I love that creamy nougat in there. This is a show. This is a serious show. So
the importance of the ratings to the network is obvious. But for the Academy, so the wheel's been negotiated. What the fee is has already been predetermined. So what is the importance of ratings to you in the awards department and to the Academy as a whole?
I think that it's diminished. I think that the ratings used to be on which the licensing fee was hung pretty much exclusively, as well as, that opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, that this was the night before the new season and you would have a chance to bring your shows in. But I think that, with the multi-platform universe of television, with Sunday Night Football, with all the different things going on, watching it on my watch, watching it on my iPhone, whatever it might be, that there is a scattering of the audience in such a way that to yearn for 46 million people to tune in like they did my first year is to have a fantasy somewhat along the lines of, make America great again. It's a fantasy world that really is not going to be coming back. It's something that's gone, and you have to now address business plans and business models and the reality of what you're doing right now. One of the things that subscription services, cable, streaming is very interested in is getting programming that is must-see, that you really need to subscribe to Hulu because you want to watch Handmaid's Tale, or you really need to subscribe to HBO or FX or whatever it might be because these are programs that you want to do. It's not a matter of eyeballs anymore, it's prestige. It's the kind of high quality, it's the platinum age of television, and there is a shift from a kind of it's sort of a shift from a democratic sensibility to almost a monarchical sensibility, that it is the shining show on the hill as opposed to the ordinary stuff that's going on down in the village. And I think that there is there is a real paradigm shift in terms of the Academy's understanding of its place within popular culture, that it is no longer, if Gunsmoke doesn't get nominated this year, people are going to be upset because Matt Dillon is a big favorite. It's a different sensibility. It's a sensibility of recognizing excellence, and that excellence is not necessarily mass market fare. I mean, how many people were there in Plato's Republic? Not many.
I knew you'd bring in Plato at some point during this talk. You mentioned that you were in the hotel room this year, watching the. Where are you, and what is your role during the actual telecast?
We are in a one of the JW Marriott suites where we would have people coming in for tickets. We have our people out on the street. Bob just came. He's out of the limo. He left his ticket in the limo. The limo's gone. Okay, does Bob know anything about where he got his ticket? No, he doesn't. Bob works for HBO. One moment, please. We get a hold of the HBO person. Where's Bob? Bob's in row 3, seat number 6. Got it. Okay, we're going to issue a ticket. Here it is. Get your Sharpie out, and you write in row 6, seat 3, and then you give it to Bob and say, Bob, now you can go in. So we take care of all those problems. You can't believe how many people leave their tickets in their limos. The fleet of LA limos on Sunday night must be just overrun with loose tickets on the floor of limos because people seem to drop them there. That's one thing that we have to take care of. Another thing is that people will just come and say, I'm supposed to be with such and such, and they never got me my ticket, and what do I do now? So then you have to ask them some questions. Most of the time it's sort of like, no, we're not buying your story. Other times we had a woman come in crying, so distressed. She was with one of the big networks. I don't know where my ticket is. I don't know. Okay, who are you with? Whatever. We were able to narrow it down, and we were able to get a hold of the person, and we were able to reissue. She said, I'm going home. No, don't go home. Let us work on it. So we were able to sort it out, and she was able to get in. Another thing that we do during the course of the show is we have a area at the Governor's Ball in which we affix the winner bands. The Emmy Award, can I pick this up?
Yes,
Yeah.
That's why we brought it.
Okay, so the Emmy Award does not have any engraving on it, but it does have a couple screws in which we engrave the band, which is this thing. Mm-hmm. It's on a flat piece. We screw it in one, take it around, screw it in the other, and then you have your name on your Emmy band. So you go to a place at the Governor's Ball and you actually have this put on.
Has it always been done that way?
No, just for the last several years.
I love that, though, because you can actually watch people getting their...
You can. But what we do is we engrave every single nominee band because we don't know who's going to win. So if you have, let's say, for example, a comedy series and you have 8 nominations in there, you might have 10 people. There might be 80 bands, and we're only going to give out the 10. So 70 go back to the factory to be melted down, and the other bands are there.
So you're in charge of making sure the right band gets, and then the other ones get destroyed and all of that?
Yes.
Wow,
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. So why can't you do it on site, engrave it? It takes too long?
The engraving machine, there are 2 types of engraving machine. One is kind of a stamp, and it looks kind of cheesy. And so we thought, no, we don't like that because again, I'll show you the band. It's black, but on the back side it's brass. And when you cut down into the black surface, then it shows up the brass letter behind it, and it really looks good. So we want it to look nice like that, and we would have to bring in. I mean, we would have to have this factory. It would be like some steampunk operation we'd get going.
That could be a whole theme.
That could be good.
Talk about her for a second.
Okay.
We were talking before the interview started about the design of the Emmy. Who is she? You know a little bit about the history.
Well, this was designed by a fellow by the name of Louis McManus, and there was a competition, and he painted a picture of his wife as like Brunhilde, the Wagnerian Valkyrie. And she's got these kind of feathery wings and like a horned helmet, and it's all sort of Nibelungen. So we went from that to another version in which we got rid of the feathers, and then we had these kind of lightning bolts. So now we're kind of moving in the direction of the intent of the Academy to further the arts and sciences of television. So you got lightning bolts, you got this atom or electron, as some people reference it, and so you've got references to TV as an electronic medium. But you also then have this character who is the muse of art, if you will, and she is uplifting, exalting the electron of science. So the Academy's intent is to further the arts and the sciences of television, all atop a Mercator grid of the world, and so this is a worldwide phenomenon. So that's the symbolic meaning of this beautiful Art Nouveau statue known as the Emmy Award. It was originally thought to be an Emmy because there was a low-light picture tube called the Image Orthicon tube, and they said, well, if Oscar can be, maybe instead of Emmy, we should do Emmy. So Emmy was feminized to Emmy, and that's the reason why we have the Emmy Award. But its origin was in this early picture tube.
And what's she made out of?
She is made out of compound metal and with a gold plating.
Mm-hmm. And have you been? It's the manufacturer is still R.S. Owens.
R.S. Owens in Chicago, yes.
And you've been back there.
I have been back there, and there's an interesting change in the Emmy a few years ago. And this is an older version, and it probably weighs maybe 6 pounds. Mm-hmm. So at a particular point, I was talking to the people at the factory, and I said, it'd be nice to have a little more heft, And they said, well, we can do that because there's a bolt that extends down through her feet down to a nut on the bottom. And they said, what we'll do is we'll just get a big chunk of lead and we'll drill a hole through it, and then we'll put it in there, and then that will make it heavier. And so we had this version lighter, and then we had a heavier version, and then we went to another version in which we had a better way to put this on, and it got even heavier. And now sometimes you see people getting the Emmy, and they kind of go like this, like they're at the gym, because it weighs quite a bit. But the psychological heft it corresponds to the weighted heft.
I love that for first-time winners, when they first get handed it on stage, they kind of go, whoa.
Yeah, it's a shock.
Yeah.
Yeah, you wouldn't think just from what you're looking at that it'd be heavy, but when you find out that it's filled with lead down at the bottom, then it makes it quite a bit heavier.
And this is I want to touch on this later, but please debunk the myth. Even though the plates are all engraved ahead of time, which it just occurred to me, then you can also check them for that they're spelled correctly and all that. But you don't know anything about the results.
I don't.
So just mention just debunk that myth that anyone at the Academy knows in advance.
Well, it's a situation in which all of the counting is exclusive to the accountants. So I'm sitting at my computer and I vote for whomever, and then I punch and I go vote, and then it goes in a wire down to Ernst & Young's headquarters downtown. And remember in the old department stores where down at the cash register you would give them your money and you would put the money into one of these pneumatic tubes and you shove it in and go up through plastic, and it'd go up to the office, and they would make the change and give the receipt, and then it would come back. Well, that's kind of like the way Emmy votes are. And we put them in the pneumatic tube, the digital version of the pneumatic tube, and they go down to the accountant's front office. So that's where it ends. It doesn't come to me, it doesn't come to anybody else from the director or from the voter directly to the accountant. So they are the only ones who have control over that. We participate in the press release because we work on the some of the boilerplate that's on, but in terms of the content, after you get past the first page, the content of the press release is 100% generated by Ernst & Young. And so we go through the show. I'm sitting there, I'm watching the monitor. Who won? Okay, this comedy series. Take all of these, put them in the box, send them back to the factory, and here are the 6 or 7 or whatever. And then a runner comes over from the governor's ball. Here's that taken over, and then they lay them all out. And so when everybody gets to the governor's ball, all of the winner bands, which are just straight like that, are on this very nice set. And then you come up and you say, I'm so-and-so, here's your band. And I've got a pair of nice white gloves on, and I screw it on for you, and I give it to you. And off you go, and you can go back to your table, and you can show that you got your Emmy.
And the Academy owns that award, correct? Even after it's given to a recipient?
Right. It is a situation which, if you, for example, you can will it to a relative, you can keep it in your family, or you can return it to the Academy. If the heirs, I've got these old Emmys and I don't know what to do with them, and they'll call me and I say, well, we'll take them back and we'll keep them in our archival storage on behalf, and so we would do that. But mainly, they tend to stay in the families if somebody.
Do you have anyone ever looking at pawn shops to see if anyone's tried to sell it or hawk it?
We get reports, and that does happen. Yes, we will see that happen, and if we can identify them, then we'll go back. If it comes up on eBay, we'll say, get it off there. That's not supposed to be there. And we have on the bottom of the Emmy specific legal language that if you wish to surrender it, you can't surrender it to your pawnbroker.